apart from the fact that the framework that is being provided and some of these exams, going online and technology is being adopted, in spite of all this, you still have exam malpractices being prevalent. Sam, what's your reaction to this?
Yes, I think, Femi, this is provokingly worrisome, particularly from the point of view where supervisors connive with students to cheat in their exam, and I think this is really worrisome. The percentage in terms of those who pass in mathematics and English is about 61 point something percent, just slightly above average, so to speak. But what is key is that NECO must find a way to prosecute those supervisors, not just sufficient to suspend them from participating in those exams. That will serve as a deterrent for some other schools and supervisors that will go in that route. I think is an issue that must be addressed, particularly from where supervisors aid pupils to compromise in the exam. I think that's not good enough for the country. Then the general conduct of the exam, when you look at the ratio of students, about 1 point something million took the exam. You have 61% in terms of maths and English. That's not too encouraging in my personal view.
But what do you think is responsible for that low performance? If we have 61.6%, achieving success or having good grades in English and mathematics, why do you have that?
There are issues with student-teacher ratio. There are issues with supervision, particularly for the regulatory agency that are in charge of school supervision. Then even parents themselves have a role to play where they connive even with officials to try to compromise the exams. These are critical issues that we need to look at, and therefore the new Minister of Education must equally declare an emergency in the education sector so that we can address some of those critical factors that are not making students perform optimally in their exams.
Yes.
Okay.
52 supervisors have been recommended for blacklisting due to their inadequate supervision, aiding and abetting. I think it's not just supervisors that should be blacklisted. We have what they call miracle centers. Those are centers where students enroll to write examinations with a guarantee, yes, because it's parents who pay for it, with a guarantee that they will be helped in quotes, meaning that there will be more practice, which will enable them pass the examination. So these centers are known. It's not just enough to blacklist supervisors, because the supervisors only keyed into a system that was already in place. Blacklist the schools as well, because if they're blacklisted and there's no market for them the next session, then it will curb the establishment of such miracle centers, or where schools are turned to miracle centers for students, because this is the assurance that the students get that makes them to develop a lax attitude towards their study. These are students that will get into the university and will be seeking lecturers that they can pay, or what they call block, in order to scale through. So for how long do we do that? And that's how we churn out people from the school system who look like, sound like, act like they never went through school.
All right. Talking about misconduct now, this will take us to the civil service. The story coming from Cross River says about 100 civil servants in Cross River Civil Service are facing disciplinary action for various misconducts, including truancy, absenteeism, and lateness to work. You have a new head of service who resumed last week, and he thought it was necessary, to pay an unscheduled visit.
A surprise visit.
So he went around the ministries and the department and discovered that a lot of workers were not, available, were not on ground. And then it's now coming up with disciplinary action. This bothers me, because sometimes when you visit those offices, people want to resume 8 o'clock. You get there, they are not there. You will see them coming in around 10, the attitude to work, and then this nonchalant attitude to work, especially when it comes to civil service, because nobody is supervising them. You know, they feel, okay, it is government thing, so we can do it anyhow. But hey, the new man in charge says, no, it's not going to be business as usual. Sam, you're smiling.
Yes, while the head of service in Cross River State is doing management by wandering, I hope he's able to sustain that pronouncement that was made. And I agree with you totally that there's a high level of laxity in the public sector. And this again has to do with the performance management system that is practiced in the public sector. They need to disciplinary action, and when those civil service rules are being compromised, then they should be showed their way out.
It reminds me of an experience a friend of mine had, you know, when we're having a youth service. The guy was posted to Ministry of Works. I won't mention the particular state so that, you know, and you have people on ground, but there are no works. Imagine Ministry of Work without work, you know, and, you know, that's has been the situation where even people come on ground, they have nothing to do. You see them roaming around. When you go to offices like that for them to, you know, something that officially it ought to be their responsibility, you see them asking you to, you know, they still want you to beg them, they still want you to cajole them, you know, to attend to them. Something they are being paid to do. And that's why this new head of service in Cross say, no, I am not going to take this, but I hope he will be able to sustain it, because it is one thing to start something, and it's another thing to be able to sustain it so that you can have, you know, proper compliance. Because if it doesn't continue in this light, it's a matter of weeks. It's going back to business as usual. Okay,
my worry is that the head of service who paid the surprise visit is new. You know what they call initial gragra? As you start, you need to make people know that there's a new sheriff in town. Could that be it? That's on one side.
Yes.
Now, I've often said here that people don't do what is expected. People do what is inspected. So without inspection, you can't just expect people to do what they should do. Ordinarily, they should do that, but we know that the ideal is not often the reality. So that's why he found that situation. And it's not just River State, it's across the nation. From the local government to the state civil service to federal civil service, you find things like that. You go to some offices, it's under lock and key. And you're wondering, people. So it has become a culture. And maybe because, too, civil servants work together for a long time. So after a while, it seemed like family affair. Should I report to you? We've been together for a long while. And then what are the sanctions? Are they weighty sanctions? Because if it's just a query and then a warning, okay, no problem. So I think more needs to be done to ensure that people who have a job do their job, because these people are rendering service to the public. There are reasons these NDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies are established. There are functions that they should do. So people not being there to attend to their duties, meaning that there will be gaps somewhere, and some persons will suffer for it in the society, in the system.
There's this argument, if Nigeria is going to be better, there's need for reform in the civil service. Sam, do you agree to that?
Yes, the reforms are all going, but in terms, there are certain elements in those reforms that must be taken seriously, particularly in the public service, that has to do with performance management. The core issues that we just spoke about has to do with the way people are praised, the way people, at the end of the day, what comes if you don't do your job well. So targets, key tasks and responsibility must be reworked in a way that people can be measured vis-a-vis what they do. And like just Blessing alluded to a why, what don't get measured doesn't get done. And that's one of the culture that is very prevalent in the public service, particularly in Nigeria. So the reform must take cognizance of how people are measured vis-a-vis their task, and the reward system must be based on performance metrics.
Today, October the 11th, is dedicated to the girl child globally. Why is it important to come up with this initiative?
All right, thank you very much indeed. In 2011, the United Nations General Assembly came with a resolution 66170, which enabled the International Day of the Girl Child, one of the imperatives of this day is to sustain the human right of the girl child, provide access to education, and bring about a kind of gender parity, particularly from the girl child, and a way to sustain gender mainstreaming so that the girl child has equal access to education. Their human right is sustained, particularly the adolescent girl child.
There's this saying that raise a girl, you raise a nation. Are we living up to that in your own assessment?
Generally, particularly from the global south, there's a developing nation where patriarchy is a major challenge. The issue of the girl child, we are not there yet, but efforts are being made to see how we can mainstream the girl child into the entire developmental process. So there's a lot of work to be done. If you look at over 10.5 million out-of-school children, the percentage of the girl child in that bracket is worrisome. Therefore, the immediate community, particularly civil society organizations, must up their game in terms of the campaign to be able to put the girl child in proper perspective. In terms of policy regime, though we have a policy framework for the girl child, in terms of practice, much needs to be done. But then, if you train the girl child, then you train the nation. So there are issues even with their personal health, in terms of the access to sanitary towel. There are girls who don't even go to school because they don't even have water. In the participants, these are issues that we need to bring to bear, particularly on this day where we focus essentially on the human right, investing on the human right of the girl child. So it's once you're able to invest meaningfully, particularly access to education, is very critical.
All right, according to the UN, nearly 1 in 5 girls are still not completing lower secondary, and nearly 4 in 10 girls are not completing upper secondary school education. And then the UN further went on to say that before COVID-19 pandemic, 100 million girls were at the risk of child marriage. Now that has even doubled, because over the next 10 years, up to 10 million more girls worldwide will be at the risk of child marriage. Because we see the situation where some girls actually start school, but according to the UN data, they do not complete lower secondary education. That is what we call junior secondary school here. And then some do not even complete the senior secondary school education. So how can we encourage from families, from communities, and even the educational level, government, how can we encourage girls to reach their full potential? Some start, but midway, they stop.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Blessing. I think the core issues here I mentioned earlier, in a society that is driven essentially by patriarchy, they encourage early marriage. So what we need to do is to find a way how we can break down these cultural barriers that are inimical to the girl child. So we must mainstream the girl child into every development area so that we're able to reduce the negative impact of early child marriage. And I talked about critical access to education. Education must be affordable, particularly for the girl child. If we're able to mainstream, like I mentioned earlier, then some of these challenges will be reduced. There are even other issues that has to do with gender inequality in terms of number of enrollment. Parents, particularly in the global south, who don't even encourage their girl child to go to school. These are some of the areas that we need to work on, particularly from a policy point of view. And the community in itself must find a way to provide incentive that will encourage the girl child to access education. With those efforts, then we'll be able to bridge the gender gap and reduce early child marriage. Even sexual exploitation for the girl child will be reduced minimally.
Talking about, early child marriage, You agree with me that it's still in vogue, even in spite of the level of campaign, the advocacy. Now, what do we need to do, especially in areas where the level of literacy is low or where you have more of illiteracy? They seem not to have complied with this, advocacy. What can be done to ensure that those girls who are becoming victims of this early marriage, because they can't speak for themselves, what do we need to do to amplify their voices?
We need to appeal to community leaders, particularly religious leaders, to see how the issue of culture and patriarchy, which is a major challenge, particularly for the girl child, must be reduced in a way that most communities should encourage their wards and their relations to have access to education. But I think the challenge more is really more in terms of religious practices that do not support the girl child. So we need a community education. We need to let religious leaders know that the more you educate the girl child, the better the society. So we need to have a holistic approach in terms of how we do development. Even those who don't even have access to education, we can provide some form of adult education where they can have access to education. So once they have access to education, then that way able to enhance their human rights.
There are still some cultural practices that are not favorable to the girl child. For instance, female genital mutilation. There have been several campaigns against it, but it still happens in communities. How can we check that?
Well, I think female genital mutilation, the last statistics that I read, there's an improvement in that. But then again, like we just mentioned earlier, we need a higher level of advocacy, particularly from civil society, a direct community interface within communities. We need to enforce the human rights of the girl child, even though when they say human rights are not justiciable, we'll find a way to see how we can prosecute people because they are enabling law that says that these practices are inimical to the reproductive health of the girl child. So once those frameworks, the policy regimes are well implemented, then those practices will be reduced minimally. But if you look at it, what it was by the year 2000 when the issues were in the public sphere, it has reduced minimally. So more campaign, more advocacy. And those who are in the Ministry of Women Affairs must find a way to reach out to the grassroots so that we can tackle this issue more effectively.
Talk to us about some of the activities enlisted for today, as it's being celebrated globally. And then what do you think can also be done, way forward to ensure that the public awareness, improves, to improve the level of public participation and awareness when it comes to a special day like this?
I think this year highlights investing on human rights and access to education to create an enabling environment for leadership that encourage policy regime that favor the girl child. So therefore, from multilateral organization to national to subnational government and up to the local government, effort must be made to highlight one, that the adolescent girl child has a human right, and human right is part of their developmental process. They must emphasize on their human right. Number two, access to education. Then we must preach this message that patriarchy does not sustain development for a better society. So the key lesson for today's celebration is that we must invest on human rights, and the human rights include access to education, access to water and sanitation, which are some inimical to the girl child in our immediate environment.
Let's let's look at role modeling for the girl child. We find that a lot the girl child or women are objectified. So what role does the media have to play, and even society have to play, to ensure that the right role model are shown to the girl child as they grow up? If you watch music videos, you find a lot of objectification of females. You watch movies and several other things. How do we begin to change the narrative? We talk about having girls in science, having girls in tech. So how do we change the narrative of them wanting to copy the things they've seen over the years to something else that is more constructive?
I think, in a nutshell, I think investing in education is critical to addressing the issue. But in specific terms, I think women in particular must find a way to see how women are not used for negative actions, particularly in branding, where you see commercial activities where women are almost in nude form. In that regard, they must project themselves first and foremost as women, and women must encourage, particularly the adolescent girl, not to be used for those kind of what do you call it, branding that are negative. And the media itself must push itself in using the female gender to promote certain elements that are not okay in the public space.
Let me read this statement to you, and it says, I would like you to react. It says, 2.2 billion people under the age of 25 do not have access to internet, with the majority being girls. How do you see that?
That's worrisome. That's worrisome. Therefore, the global community must find a way to invest in technology, particularly investment that are targeted towards the girl child. And I do know recently, as a country, we had some money from the World Bank that is targeting the adolescent girl child. So this is a wake-up call that that money must be invested meaningfully to see how we can improve on the situation, particularly access to technology for the girl child.
All right, since we're talking about access, there's been this debate that a certain necessity for the girl child should be subsidized. We talked about subsidy a while ago, and Femi alluded to the fact that subsidy is a global thing, and governments all over the world subsidize one item or the other for their citizens. Now, when we talk about sanitary pads, there's been the debate or the advocacy that it should be subsidized for the girl child to be able to afford it, because it is a necessity. Now, we find out when we talk about combating infections, HIV, government talk about providing preventive methods for people, such as the use of condoms, and they donate to schools. But that is optional. You choose to either abstain or be involved or get intimate. But a girl child doesn't choose whether or not to have a monthly cycle. It is natural. What's your take on that issue?
For me, I don't even think about subsidy when it comes to sanitary towels for the girl. I think it's a basic human right when you look at it from the perspective of sanitation and water. I do know, I read a report recently that in some country, some girls don't even go to school because they don't even have access to water and sanitary towel. And this is a more challenging situation. So I think of a necessity, some of the programming that they need to do with this funding must involve giving sanitary pads to the girl child, particularly at the early stage, and they should put it and find a way to donate those things to the girl child from various schools. And I think the government has the capacity to be able to provide free access to sanitary towel to enhance the dignity of the girl child and a way to encourage them to be in school. Can you imagine when girls don't even go to school, when they are under their monthly cycle because they don't even have access to clean water, they don't even have access. These are core issues of development that the government must look into. So I use this opportunity to suggest to the Minister of Women Affairs that this loan that is targeted to the adolescent girl child must be used adequately in such a manner that improve on the condition of the adolescent girl child for which those funds were originally meant for.
Let's look at the issue of, you know, some who have this archaic mindset or this impervious mindset that the place of the girl child should be in the kitchen or should be at home doing, you know, domestic chores and things like that. How do we begin to change the narrative for people like that to understand that, yes, there are women who are proving that they are more capable to handle, you know, responsibilities, even political offices? How do we begin to change that on a national scale, then looking at our political system and, you know, also our social, you know, system as well?
I think we already have a lot of role models globally, women who are at the top of various institutions, government, political, commercial. So those are incentive even for the girl child to look onto. But then we must invest massively on literacy education to say that there's what you call gender equality. We must constantly mainstream gender into our education, into our development policies. Once we're able to do that, then these die-hard people who don't believe there's a place for the girl child will change quickly. So, but women globally are doing very well. We have some of our own playing at the international war stage in terms of their roles, and then women are competing globally. We have women who are pilots. We have women who have gone to space. So I think we must encourage that there's what you call gender equality, and we must work towards that direction to achieve that equality, particularly for the girl child.
Let's look at violence against the girl child. There's still a high rate of rape going on. And violence, whether domestic violence or violence generally against the girl child. Now, let's look at this way. Oftentimes we talk about training the girl child, but is it possible to just train the girl child alone and not train the boy child as well, and have a society where there is a society free of violence? How do we work around this to ensure that the girl child is protected, whether within the domestic environment or outside the domestic environment? Looking at the boy child too, what are the things to be taught to the boy child? What are the things to be taught to male folks so that they understand and know how to make the girl child feel protected?
I think those in gender studies have come up with a new language that they call gender-sensitive language. That is the beginning of the reform, that we must use language that are gender-sensitive. So you talk about chairman rather than using the word chairperson. You talk about gentlemen of the press. Why don't you just use a more gender-friendly language? That is the beginning for those who are in gender study. So number two, we must equally train the boy child to respect the right of the girl child. And that, to a very large extent, will reduce the issues of gender-based violence that currently is on the high side across the world. So in that regard, once we do our construction of language that is more inclusive in terms of the way we approach the boy child, the way we approach the girl child, then there will be a harmony in terms of the relationship. In the long run, then, these issues of gender-based violence, particularly at the adolescent stage, will be reduced. Then parents must be responsible enough in terms of the way they relate, even with the women. So when people are growing up, once there's a harmonious relationship from the family level, and the way the boy child or the man addresses the woman, once those conversations are harmonious, that will help in terms of the upbringing of the gender. So the current language is to use the word gender, which is inclusive, which is mainstream, including the boy and the girl child, in such a way then you can have a meaningful strategic relationship as they move from adolescent into adulthood.
As we wrap up, what kind of policy, what kind of intervention are you expecting from the government, especially on a day like this, from NGOs, in order to ensure that the right of a girl child is being respected and is being upheld at national level?
My first message for today is that there were certain elements, about 10 of them, if I remember correctly, that were gender related, that were dropped in the last amendment to the law. So the National Assembly, the 10th National Assembly, of the necessity, must rework those bills that are very sensitive, that are friendly to the women gender. That's number one. Number two, the Ministry of Women Affairs must find a way to see the affirmative action that favor gender. They do a lot of advocacy, see how those policy framework favor the women, particularly in terms of political office, in terms of access to education. Once you're able to sustain this, then the investment in the human rights of the girl child become more meaningful, and the girl child will have its appropriate place in society.